Welcome back to another strange and mysterious podcast. Of course,
Look at that
I'm one of
face.
your hosts, G. Introduce yourself, fellas.
Go ahead, McVice. It's been a while. Go.
Okay, I'm McVice. Back, motherfuckers. That's right.
I'm back.
And yeah, glad to be back.
Awesome. We're glad to have you back. It's Define
Thank
Triple
you.
Nine.
Thank you.
Define Triple Nine here.
Damn right.
All the
back in
triple
the-
nines.
Yo.
You need something defined? Hit me up. I'll define it for you.
Hey, very dangerous game you play, sir. All right. So, how many of you have ever heard of Edgar Cayce?
Mm-hmm.
I have.
You've heard of Edgar Cayce. His story is phenomenal, and he's one of the very few that we know about that was invited to the White House along with Jane Dixon, right, as being a psychic.
Yep.
And with that, he had a lot of prophetic readings about the future, right? And so we're going to discuss and look at, some of the top different readings that he did to see if maybe they came true, if maybe they're coming true, right? Maybe at this time they're unfolding.
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. Let me share my screen.
The year is 1921, and you are wrestling with some major life decision. A potential business opportunity. Is she the one?
You are correct, sir.
Whatever. And a friend of yours suggests you go see somebody who could help. Someone who might have a way of knowing which decision would work out best.
That wouldn't be McVice, would it?
Absolutely. Come to the right place.
He'll give you the McVice that you need.
Yes. The Mick advice.
Yeah, it's quick. It's quick, full of carbs.
And it only costs $5.
Yep.
Hey, negatory.
Hey, he'll give you a little kiss on the forehead. He'll plant one.
Oh,
true.
You pay the $5. You get the advice, and you go right there. On your
only
forehead.
if you're a lady. If you're a guy, you get a predator handshake.
Oh no, you get
predator
a predator handshake or a fist bump. I like it.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's continue.
So you go to this person's house, they have a nice little waiting room, and you sit there and you wait with a glass of water, and eventually a slender man with glasses walks in and ushers you into his office. In the office is a fainting couch, a little settee that you often see in psychiatrists' offices where they ask people to lay down and get comfortable while the psychiatrist probes the
Take off your clothes.
But before you get a chance to sit on the couch, the guy lays down on it first and then just takes a nap. And then the guy starts talking in his sleep and muttering some very
and tickling your
specific
toes
information about you and predicting things that are going to happen in your future. This is the experience shared by thousands of people when they enlisted the help of Edgar Cayce.
Oh, shit.
Edgar Cayce was born in Hopkinsville, Kentucky in 1877. Hopkinsville, Kentucky is also famously known as the place where 7 million blackbirds congregated in 1975. That's according to the opening scroll in the movie Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, so it's a pretty good source. Anyway, according to the official website for Edgar Cayce, his psychic abilities began in childhood, but really his childhood wasn't any different from any other person's childhood. He played with imaginary friends, he memorized the contents of books by sleeping on them, he communicated with his dead grandfather. He was also visited by a woman with wings in the woods one day while he was reading his Bible, telling him that all of his prayers were going to be answered when he became a missionary. Normal childhood stuff. All kidding aside, Cayce was a very devout Christian, and he did want to help people. And his way of helping people was to do psychic readings for them, of which he did 14,000. And the way he did his readings was he would basically just lay down on a couch, fall asleep, go into a bit of a trance state, and then just start
listening to Kenny G. No, I'm just joking. This is the last podcast. Probably wanted some NWA. I'm just saying.
What's wrong with Kenny G?
It goes back to the story from the previous Strange and Mysterious podcast that my mom said that I deviated to hip hop when I went with her to a Kenny G concert. It was so bad and so terrible for me that I was like, nah, I'm going the opposite.
He's going to go the absolute opposite way.
According to my mother, that's what she said.
Where Kenny G went wrong in the 80s, like I think his first or second album, he had it produced by Kashif, and that shit was dope. And it's like when he, went on his own, it's like, whatever,
I couldn't rock with it.
Dude, his tracks with Kashif were fucking dope. Because Kashif was fucking dope,
Yep. Hey,
Anyway.
It's all about the producer, right? I'm just saying.
Oh, fuck yeah, dude. Fuck yeah. Kashif, bro? Shit. Oh, matter of fact, you guys listen to this song tonight. Nighttime, and it's just called Tribeca by Kenny G. Fucking smooth as shit, dude.
Okay. I'll have to check it out.
Anyway, sorry.
Tribeca.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll have to check it out. I may jump back on that Kenny G bend.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Just in case, we'll check it out.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Okay, sorry.
No, you're good.
Talking, and the secretary would write down what he said. He claimed that he could connect to a universal consciousness or a superconscious mind when he was in this sleep state. So people would ask him questions, and then he would answer back what the universal consciousness told him. Because of this, he became known as the sleeping prophet, but some people also call him the father of modern holistic medicine. More than half of Cayce's readings dealt with health-related topics, and he was a huge proponent of locally grown and seasonal foods. The diet he recommended falls in line with what we call today the Mediterranean diet. He also suggested through his readings that people get outside more, exercise more, drink more water, eat more vegetables, learn how to relax. These are all things that we know today to be a good thing. So yeah, go superconscious mind. He also did predict some things while he was in this trance-like state, and he got some things right. There was a stock market crash in 1925 that he predicted before it happened, and he also predicted the big market crash of 1929. Much like Obi-Wan Kenobi felt a great disturbance in the Force, Edgar Cayce said this: "We may expect a considerable break in bear market, see? This issue being between those of the reserves of nations and of individuals and will cause a great disturbance in financial circles." Expect a considerable break in bear markets, eh? Another one of his predictions that came true was World War II, which he predicted in 1935, 4 years before we entered the war. He predicted that Austrians, Germans, and Japanese would be involved and said, quote, "Unseen and gradually growing to those affairs where there must become, as it were, almost a direct opposition to that which has been the theme of the Nazis, for these will gradually make for a growing of animosities."
He looks like he just got caught with something, huh? Hey, what you doing? Huh?
Oh, you were supposed to see that.
Hey, sorry, I was texting one of my ladies. Sorry about that.
Yeah. When you're a psychic, you tend to get psychic groupies. Right?
He's like,
yeah, chicks dig that future reading potential, man.
Right, it's all in the brain. It's all in the brain.
Yep.
Other predictions of his that came true, or seemed to be coming true, was he predicted the finding of the Dead Sea Scrolls, he predicted communication mergers happening in communication companies, and he predicted the use of blood as a diagnostic tool. Now, before we start hitting a woo-woo alarm, let's just be honest here. He did 14,000 readings.
God,
you're going to accidentally get some things right. But he also made some claims that are pretty...
did more than that, actually.
Not real. He predicted China would become an overwhelmingly Christian nation by 1968. He predicted New York City would be destroyed in a cataclysm and California would fall off into the ocean, which has happened in multiple movies, so... A lot of Cayce's critics point out that he didn't really have beyond a grammar school education, that he got really involved in occult practices and stuff like that, and he had medical readings that he did, and he had some good health advice, but he also had friends who were medical doctors. One of his critics named Dale Beyerstein actually pointed out that in the first 9 years that he gave readings, he was actually accompanied by a guy named Al Lane, who was a medical doctor and a friend of his. Interesting thing about Lane, he was also a hypnotist, and at one point in his life, Cayce had laryngitis and wasn't able to speak for like a few years. And apparently Lane was able to turn that around with hypnosis, and then some of his patients became some of Cayce's first readings. Another criticism of Cayce is that he often had information about people's medical histories before he actually met with them, because they did tell him in the letters that they sent him. According to the magician and skeptic James Randi, he says, "To one who's been through dozens of similar diagnoses as I have, the methods are obvious. It is merely a specialized version of generalization techniques of fortune tellers." Now, there is some pushback on that specific criticism, though, because apparently there were many of his diagnoses that were not precluded by some kind of letter. Now, regardless of whether he got his information from a medical buddy that was sitting right next to him or the universal consciousness, his health advice was actually pretty sound, drink more water, get more exercise, rest, that kind of stuff. But you have to balance some of that against some of his crazier readings, like these. He predicted a death ray from Atlantis would be discovered, that Atlantis would rise again, that Armageddon would take place in 1999, that a Hall of Records would be found under the Sphinx, that most of Japan will disappear into the sea, and that the Great Lakes will empty into the Gulf of Mexico. I don't think he understands how water works. All of those predictions I just listed are things that should have happened by now. But what about the things that haven't happened yet that he says are going to happen? Well, here's a few. One of his predictions was that our lifespans would be greatly extended. Cayce said, "Man should live much longer than has been ordinarily given, and will." Given all the research and medicine that's been put toward extending our lifespans, that doesn't seem like too much of a stretch. He also predicted that a design for self-fueling perpetual motion machines will be discovered. He did make it clear that he wasn't talking about an airplane, though, because specifically when somebody asked if he was talking about the same machine that Charles Lindbergh used, his response was, and I quote, "No." Finally, Cayce predicted that ozone levels would rise. There's many other people predicting that as well these days. James Randi said in the film Flim Flam that Cayce was fond of expressions like, "I feel that," and "perhaps," qualifying words used to avoid positive declarations. It's a common tool in the psychic trade. But Cayce's retort to that is that a prophecy is never given as anything more than a warning, and a successful prophecy is one that avoids that thing happening in the first place. Kind of convenient. Now, there's still a lot of people out there that believe in Edgar Cayce and the predictions that he made. There's still a whole society out there that supports his work.
Right?
How do you feel about it? Are you on the James Randi side, saying that all of this is just quackery and buffoonery? Do you think there might actually be something to the sleeping prophet and the warnings that he gave us? Talk about it down below. All right, please like and share this video if you liked it and if this is...
All right, so what do y'all think? Do you think Edgar Cayce was, an actual psychic, or was he a charlatan?
Hard to say, man, just because that's just how it is with psychics, period,
Well, we do know, right, based on, what we've talked about before and, studying, that the government took it serious enough to invite him over. Right? Him and Jane Dixon. And, right, other things like Project Jedi. So there's some, signs that point to they believe in this stuff also, right?
Of course they do.
On the flip side of that, I mean, being a charlatan has been in common use for years and years and thousands of years and millions of years, however long it's been, where people find techniques that they can use on people to trick them, right? Mm-hmm. So, it's hard to distinguish, not to say that there's probably not psychics, but there's probably a lot more, charlatans than there are psychics, in my opinion. Right?
Yeah, I would say the percentage of fakes would be way high. Mm-hmm. I mean, extremely high. I mean, I'm talking for every 80 fakes, there's maybe one guy that's actually tapping into some universal knowledge. With Edgar Cayce, I do think that because of the amount that he did, the percentage of ones he's going to get right increases from pure statistics. So I struggle with that a little bit. Like, I don't know. And I also think that, I don't know. I think that I struggle more with predictions because I feel like remote viewing and stuff like that that's happening in real time, supernatural, I feel like that's more likely than being able to look through time per se. I just think that I don't know. I struggle with that.
And another kind of interesting thing is that Edgar Cayce charged money for his readings.
Yeah, that's
but he didn't want to. What happened is people started sending him money in the mail and then like demanding, psychic readings and stuff. So then at some point he transformed into a guy who charged,
Yeah, and that makes sense.
Yeah.
And the other part of it too is you got to think about it. Anyone that does anything isn't going to be able to do it perfectly every time. So you would have to assume that there would be times when he's using the same techniques, but for whatever reason isn't quite getting it as clear or as correct. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Just like no one in your profession of what you do, you're never going to hit it out of the park 100% every time, unless you're fucking, I don't know, Barry Bonds or an NFL superstar that is like at the top of their game. Most people, they're somewhere down into the percentages later. So I would assume that there would be plenty of readings that maybe he didn't see right, or he read them wrong, or I guess my point is, I'm not saying he was a charlatan in the sense that he was figuring out ways to rip people off. I think maybe he just like in most people that do most things, he didn't, maybe had bad days. Maybe there were days he wasn't as connected, blah, blah, blah.
One of the prophecies that he kind of predicted that I think is kind of interesting, they asked him, they said, when is the end of the world going to occur? And he says, you'll know when the start of the end of the world is occurring is when the weather starts to get more severe. And maybe I'm just off, but hasn't it kind of seemed the last couple, 10 years or so, that the weather's been getting more violent and more worse? And people have been saying, oh, it's climate change, it's this, it's that. Yeah. So that kind of prediction stuck with me. Is he going to be right? I'm not sure, but things have been definitely getting stranger, right? Think about all these diseases, thinking about the return of the polio that's happening in New York, the monkeypox that they're like, what the hell's going on with this damn thing? It's not supposed to be spreading like that. Yeah. So we're starting to have telltale signs that maybe, things are changing, and maybe for the worse for humanity. What do you guys think about that?
What I'll say is I agree with you, but what I don't know is how much of it is controlled by man, We, this could be a whole nother episode, but there's technology to manipulate the weather. How do we know the governments of the world aren't doing this to the whole world, and these people, these elites, who are behind the curtain, if you will, they could be trying to manipulate everything, and who knows, man? Like, I don't know what's natural versus what's man-made anymore, I can look at a cloud and be like, yeah, it looks like a natural cloud. And then I can look at a cloud like, that looks like a man-made cloud, And some of those man-made clouds produce storms, So it's like, how much of this extreme weather is, a natural act, and how much of it's, man,
Yeah, what's interesting is that a lot of the countries back in the day signed like a proclamation that said that they wouldn't use weather as a weapon, right? Which is really interesting. Why would you even say that?
The fact that they signed that note tells you right there that they knew they had the capability to do so.
Or
devil's always in the detail.
Or that it was coming, but they knew that it was, if they didn't have it, they knew it was coming.
Well, kind of like the mixture, right, between the mystical and technology. Before one of the heads of Skunk Works passed away, he said, we have the ability to send ET home, right? And so think about this, right, in this fashion. We view certain things like psychics or dreams or telekinesis. We view those as almost mythical, right? In the culture, like, oh, wow, that's like, crazy magical stuff. But let's transverse that to, let's say we go back into the days of, Cro-Magnon man and Neanderthal, and we throw a lighter, right, and give it to them, and they flick it, and they see fire coming out. What are they going to view, right? Wow, this is like magical. It's this. When really it's technology explaining, a specific chemical reaction to create fire, right?
Yeah.
we can create lightning now. We don't view it as, oh, wow, it's this wondrous thing. We can study it. So my point is, if technology gets so advanced that it can start to describe what's happening in dreams and what's happening with telekinesis and what's happening with these ideas of magic, maybe a person like Edgar Cayce just tapped into that early, right? Because we do, again, know that psychics, for the most part, are real. There are psychics that can do these things, right?
Yeah.
There's people that can do telekinesis, right? So as we get more into the technology version, it's just an explanation in my view of what's happening to things that we don't understand. What do you guys think?
Yeah, it's possible.
Mm-hmm.
If I had the power of telekinesis, you guys would want to go out with me every fucking night. We'd be at the bar, dude. I'd be sending drinks flying. People would be like, what? It would be insane. I would de-pants fools. Like that fool going trying to hit on that hot chick, buying her a drink, and but I'd de-pants his ass right there.
You're like, man.
Yeah, those pants would drop. Like, I would be the life of, you guys would want to go out with me every night because we would have a blast.
Hey, nothing would be ever the same after a night with Define 99, huh?
Yeah, after he's de-pantsed a few fools at the bar, dude. we would laugh so hard at these fools getting de-pantsed while they're trying to hit on some chick. No, but the thing that I find interesting about your comment that you said earlier too, is that in the history of the world, extinctions. Sorry, I'm drinking some beer, burping here. I'm a nasty little fool here. Extinctions are always predicated by massive environmental turmoil. Almost, if not, I think all the time. I think I'm not a scientist, but a scientist would have to say. But most of the major extinction points on Earth were usually predicated from extremely fast and outrageous, in the history of the Earth time, changes in weather, all sorts of stuff. A lot of people don't realize this, but during that time when there was the massive insects, they were huge, right? The reason they could be so huge is because oxygen at that time had a higher percentage in the atmosphere. Like an insect in our time now, with the way the oxygen is, my understanding of the way insects breathe is they couldn't get that large. So the oxygen levels in the atmosphere were actually so high that we would get sick and die. I think we would go like when you get too much oxygen in your blood and it changes to pH or whatever. Like we couldn't even survive in that time. So when you start to see drastic changes in weather, atmospheric events, you could even say events of space weather, asteroids, shit like that. I think that they're always before some major hardcore shit going down. And I'm going to assume that if humans end up going extinct, and it's not by our own hands, like a nuclear war or something like that, it's probably going to be predicated by massive weather and environmental changes on the planet. Whether they're man-made or not, it really doesn't matter. But I think they always predicate and causes stress on a species because those changes are too fast for us to evolve to keep up with them. And just every species on the planet goes through that same thing. You change their fundamental environment too much, too fast, for the most part, they're dying.
And do you think maybe the Edgar Cayce kind of predicted that? He knew that, right? Because one of his predictions was that the water levels would rise, and they are rising. But is it because he knew history, maybe? Because this is the 1930s, right?
I don't know how. Remember, that was around the time that a lot of people were first hearing about really you know, I mean, in the mainstream, Darwin's History of Evolution. You got to remember that at the turn of the century, there were still a lot of fools that were all about, you know, whatever belief system they were. If you're an Indian, you thought that the Thunderbird created the earth. If you're a Christian, it was God. If you're Muslim, it was Allah or whoever. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But I really do think that at the turn of the century, there was a scientific renaissance in a lot of stuff, and I think that's where you get Darwin's theory of evolution really starting to take off, and so you get a lot more sciencey stuff in there. And it was around that time, if you remember, there was a big debate between a scientist and a religious scholar, and it was huge. It was like nationwide. Everyone wanted to hear this debate between a scientist and this religious scholar. And I don't remember, it was maybe in the 1920s, and it happened somewhere in maybe the Midwest. But so the fact that Cayce was more on the Christian spectrum of things tells me that maybe it wasn't necessarily, science stuff kind of permeating into his explanations.
Mm-hmm. And then what's interesting was that a lot of people don't know that there's other theories beyond Darwinism.
Oh yeah,
right?
Yeah,
like the theory of mutual benefit, right? Mm-hmm. And I didn't know this until I went to college, right? And then I was like, oh well, damn, I only heard about Darwinism, right?
Yeah.
But of course that was probably for a certain purpose also. But I don't know. I think the way that Edgar Cayce grew up, to where he was, I think maybe, he could have been, a prophet. He could have been a psychic person, because think about it in this way. Would they just invite any, Joe Blow out of just anywhere to go to the White House?
Probably not.
Yes, they would.
You think they would?
Well, they invite NBA teams.
Yeah, and specifically like another person like Jane Dixon, right? Like she's pretty well famous too. And my response, probably no. Like they probably did their research and was like, okay, let's see, if what we're hearing, is true, because we have, some people that are saying that he can do this stuff. So in my opinion, I think that Edgar Cayce probably was a psychic, and he probably, predicted a lot of stuff. So I don't know. What do you think, McVice?
Well, I think this is what's dangerous about prophets and people who read tarot, psychics, and all this stuff, is they're telling you what's supposed to happen in the future when this stuff hasn't happened yet. So they might think it's going to happen. What they're seeing, it's going to happen this year. It's going to happen 50 years from now on this whatever date. That's not how things seem to work, And I think there's a reason why the Bible's against this stuff. It's like, once again, I think it's men tapping into something that they don't fully understand. They're working with forces that could be demonic. They just don't fully understand what they're actually seeing. They think they do. They might be tricked into thinking that, but the reality doesn't necessarily match up, So it's always a dangerous thing, in my opinion, man, and I think it's funny because, okay, what if time travel actually exists? What if the governments, not just ours, others, they've been doing time travel for years now, right? So you go to that whole, you've seen it in movies, right? Hey, you can't know the future because then you're gonna affect it,
Affect it. Butterfly effect.
Yeah, right. So if you go to a psychic, like, tell me what's going to happen to me this year, and they tell you, and then, okay, let's say something bad's going to happen, you're like, oh shit, I'm going to make sure I avoid that, But the thing is, you could be affecting reality in that sense, because that's what's supposed to happen. I know not everyone believes in God and all that stuff, but what if God wants you to die next year for a specific fucking reason that's beyond your understanding, and here you are affecting it,
Well, you know what, McVice, it gets kind of dicey, right? And what I mean by that is this. When you have scientists talking about string theory, right, which is one of my favorites, and there's an infinite amount of possibilities. And now they're talking about, an actual multiverse that's happening, right?
Right.
And they think that because of that test that was happening in Antarctica, right? Then that brings up other questions, right? For example, what is death? Do I die in this reality, but in another reality, my doppelganger's out there doing whatever, and then another one's doing this? It becomes sticky, right? It becomes sticky. And not to say that couldn't be what's going on, or maybe even this. How about this? Edgar Cayce may be looking into another multiverse, into a future that those things happen, but maybe in Earth it doesn't. Right?
That is the rub. That is one of the rubs for sure.
Yep.
And they talk about deja vu, right? Maybe we're having deja vu because we're, a symbiote to us in another multiverse that has already done it, right? We're like, oh, damn, this
absolutely.
Seems real.
Yeah. Or what about your dreams? Sticky. We've all had dreams where maybe it's like you had a dream with your family, right? Everyone was normal. Like your mom was the same, your dad was the same, your brother, sister, all the same. And the house you lived in was different. The city you lived in was different, but it's like the same city you grew up in, but in the dream, it looks nothing like the city in real life, It's like, is that you in a parallel or a different realm? You know what I mean? Like, is that you in a parallel dimension?
Yeah.
Where almost everything's the same except for it's not, I mean, it's crazy. And the dream world is interesting because that's where Nikola Tesla got all of his inventions from. That's why he would tell people, I'm not a genius, I tap into the dream world and the ideas come to me there,